Late nights have a strange stillness to them, especially when the roads empty out and the world feels paused between one day and the next. Gas stations, those small pockets of fluorescent light in the middle of wide darkness, seem almost comforting at first glance. A place to refuel, grab a drink, stretch your legs before getting back on the road. Most people pass through them without thinking, barely noticing the hum of the overhead lights or the soft clatter of the cooler door settling shut behind them. The air is cooler near the pumps, touched by the scent of gasoline and distant asphalt, and the quiet hum beneath everything makes it easy to forget how isolated these places can really be. But sometimes, when the hour grows late and the noise of traffic fades into a single long stretch of silence, these ordinary stops start to feel different. Maybe it's the way the shadows settle beneath the canopy lights, or how a figure at the far pump seems still for a little too long before shifting. Maybe it's the soft ring of the door chime echoing in an empty store, or the way your own reflection in the window looks startled for half a second before you recognize yourself. There's a subtle change in the air you can't name, a quiet suggestion that someone else might be paying attention from just out of sight. And that's the danger most people never think about, not the loud threats or obvious risks, but the quiet moments when something feels slightly off and you can't explain why. Tonight's stories come from those moments, from people who stopped for fuel or snacks and found themselves stepping into something they didn't understand until it was already too late. So before we begin, take a breath, settle into the dark around you, and remember that even the safest places feel different after midnight. And now we start with the first story. It was close to midnight when I pulled into the gas station, the kind of quiet hour when even the air feels tired. I'd been driving for hours after a long shift out of town, and the steady thrum of the road had started to blur my thoughts. The station sat just off the highway, surrounded by a wide patch of gravel that caught the yellow glow of the overhead canopy lights. Everything looked still, too still, maybe the kind of stillness that only happens when a place is meant to be open but feels abandoned anyway. The cooler air outside the car brushed against my face as I stepped out, carrying that faint smell of gasoline and dust that always clings to these places. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt, how nice it was to stretch for a moment before getting back on the road. I noticed him when I walked toward the pump, a man sitting on the concrete curb near the air station just at the edge of the lighting. His clothes looked ordinary enough, a dark jacket, loose jeans, sneakers that might have once been white. His head was bowed, chin almost touching his chest as if he were asleep sitting upright. At first, I didn't think anything strange about it. People rest at gas stations all the time. Long drives wear you out. But as I walked past him, the stillness of his posture took on a different weight. He didn't shift. He didn't scratch his face or readjust his legs. He sat perfectly motionless, like a statue placed there with purpose. When I started pumping gas, I glanced toward him again. He hadn't moved an inch. Nothing about him changed, not even a breath I could see from that distance. I told myself the cold made it harder to see, that people sit weirdly when they're tired. But there was something about the angle of his head, the unnatural stillness of his shoulders that made my stomach tighten. It felt like he was listening without appearing to. As I tried to focus on the numbers climbing on the pump, letting the clicking sound ground me, but my eyes kept flicking back toward him, half expecting him to look up or shift. When the pump clicked off, I found myself hesitating before walking toward the store to grab a drink. I told myself I was overthinking, that exhaustion was making the situation feel stranger than it was. Still, I chose to walk a little wider around him than I normally would have. As I passed behind him, the gravel under my shoes crunched softly in the quiet. Even that sound felt too loud. He didn't react, not a twitch, not an acknowledgement that someone was there. It was as though he didn't hear me, or was deliberately pretending not to. Inside the store, the bright fluorescent lights made everything feel more normal. The cashier barely looked up as I walked in, and I grabbed a bottle of water and a snack just to have something to do with my hands. When I reached the counter, I felt compelled to mention the man outside. I lowered my voice and said something casual like, "Does that guy outside come here often?" The cashier frowned. "What guy?" he asked. I gestured toward the window, but from that angle we could only see the front pumps and part of the lot. I felt stupid bringing it up and said it was nothing. When I stepped back outside, the chill hit me harder than before. The man was still there, same posture, same bowed head, same absolute stillness. My heart beat faster without my permission. The station lights hummed overhead, flickering near the edges like they couldn't decide whether to stay on. I tried to walk normally, tried not to show how aware I was of him. The gravel crunched under my shoes again, and that's when it happened, something so small and soft I almost convinced myself I imagined it. His hand moved. Not fully, not enough to call it a gesture. Just a faint flex of the fingers, a slow uncurling as if reacting to the sound of my footsteps. It was subtle, so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking at him already. I froze, breath catching in my chest. His hand settled again, hanging loosely off his knee, lifeless and still. But the movement was real. It changed everything. I forced myself to keep walking, trying to tell myself he was waking up or stretching. But my instincts screamed that something about him wasn't waking up at all, something about him was paying attention. When I reached my car, I fumbled slightly with my keys, my pulse thudding in my ears. The man still hadn't lifted his head. That's what unnerved me the most. No matter what moved, his eyes, wherever they were, stayed fixed on the ground. I opened the car door and accidentally let my keys slip from my fingers. They hit the pavement with a clatter that echoed louder than it should have in the empty lot, and the man's head tilted not up, not toward me fully, but just enough to break the illusion of sleep. His chin rose a few inches, slow and deliberate, like someone responding to a sound they'd been waiting for. My breath froze. I waited for him to look at me, to acknowledge me, but he didn't. He kept his head angled just low enough that I couldn't see his face, but high enough that I knew he was no longer pretending to be unaware. I picked up my keys as quietly as I could, hands trembling. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a second that felt longer than it was. The man hadn't moved again, but I had the awful, certain feeling that his ears were tuned to every sound I made, that he was listening with a focus that had nothing to do with sleep or rest. I drove away slowly, trying not to draw attention. When I reached the exit, something made me glance at the side mirror. He was standing. The man who hadn't moved for the entire time I was there was now upright, facing the direction my car had gone, his body silhouetted by the harsh station lights. His head was still angled down, but his shoulders were squared, as if locked onto a target he didn't want to lose sight of. I didn't stay to see anything else. I pressed harder on the gas and merged onto the road as the station receded behind me. The next morning, still shaken, I glanced at the news while drinking coffee. A headline caught my eye: a homicide at a gas station off the same highway I'd taken. The details were vague, but the location was unmistakable. Police were searching for a suspect described as a man seen sitting near the air pump hours before the incident, head bowed, unresponsive to witnesses who passed by. They said he never looked up at any of them. And I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I had dropped those keys a second later, or if I had waited for him to look at me first. I had just finished a late shift and was halfway through a long drive home when I stopped at a small gas station off Route 7. It was one of those places that always felt slightly forgotten, with flickering canopy lights and a store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. The night was cold and unusually quiet, and the kind of stillness that settles after 1 a.m. made everything feel farther away than it really was. I parked near the entrance, thinking I'd only be a minute, just long enough to grab a snack and some water before the rest of the drive. The air had a faint dampness to it, the kind that clings to your jacket and makes sounds travel strangely, as if the night itself was listening. I noticed her when I stepped out of the car, a woman standing near the far end of the pumps, partially hidden by a column. She was soaked from the rain that had passed earlier, hair flattened against her cheeks, jacket dripping. At first, she wasn't facing me. She was angled slightly away, staring down at the concrete like she was trying to read something written there. I thought she might be waiting for someone or trying to fix her phone, which she held loosely in one hand. From a distance, she didn't seem threatening, just out of place. But something about the way she stood stiff, like she was bracing herself, put a small, cold weight in my stomach. Inside the store, the brightness felt almost harsh after the dim parking lot. The cashier looked half asleep, barely glancing up as I walked in. I wandered the aisles slower than necessary, mostly because I didn't want to go back outside just yet. The hum of the refrigerator units filled the silence, steady and mechanical. When I approached the counter, the cashier finally spoke, muttering something about the weather. I tried to sound casual when I mentioned the woman outside, but he only shrugged and said she hadn't come in. That bothered me more than it should have. If she needed help, why stand outside in the cold rain instead of coming in where it was warm? When I stepped back out, she was closer. Not by a little, by enough that I felt startled without fully understanding why. She was now standing between two pumps instead of behind the column, only a few yards from my car. Her posture hadn't changed much, but her head was slightly lifted now, and I could see her eyes tracking me even though she pretended not to. Her phone was still in her hand, but the screen was dark. I walked toward my car at a steady pace, trying not to look like I was hurrying. My keys felt too loud as they jingled. Just as I reached for the door handle, I heard a soft voice behind me. "Excuse me, could you give me a ride?" It wasn't yelled or desperate. It sounded practiced, almost rehearsed, like she had said it many times before. Something in the tone made my skin prickle. I turned slowly, forcing myself to meet her eyes. She stood a few steps away, arms held close to her body as if she were cold, but her expression didn't match the posture. She didn't look like someone seeking warmth or shelter. She looked like someone waiting for a specific answer. I told her I wasn't heading that direction, keeping my voice polite, trying not to show how uneasy I felt. She didn't blink. "It's just down the road," she said softly. "Really close." She gestured vaguely toward the highway, not giving a direction that made sense. The way she said it felt wrong, as if she was trying to make the distance sound smaller than it was supposed to be. Instinct kicked in hard, warning me that something about this wasn't right. I apologized again, giving the kind of excuse people give when they want to end a conversation without confrontation. That's when I noticed movement near the ice machine. Just a faint shift, almost hidden by the corner of the building. Someone was crouched low beside it, half hidden behind the metal unit. I couldn't see their face, but I could see the shape, a hunched figure, still except for the slight balancing motion people make when shifting weight on their feet. My chest tightened. I don't know why I looked there, but the moment I did, the woman's head turned too, almost reflexively, like she needed to check if I'd seen something I shouldn't have. My pulse spiked and I mumbled something about being late. She took a step closer. "It'll just take a second," she whispered. "Please." Her voice stayed soft, but the urgency underneath it sharpened. Not desperation, coordination, like she was trying to keep me still long enough for something to happen. My hand tightened around my keys and without thinking, I clicked the unlock button twice. Not to open the car, to switch on the headlights. The beams lit up the parking lot in a wide arc, spilling across the pumps, the store windows, and the ice machine. The figure behind it froze in the light, caught mid-crouch. He was holding something reflectively metallic, a tool or maybe a blade. The woman flinched not dramatically, but enough that I knew she hadn't expected the light to hit that angle. Her face shifted not into fear, but into a warning glare meant for the man, not me. I got into my car so quickly I don't remember the exact sequence of movements. I locked the doors, shoved the key into the ignition, and pulled out with a sharp turn. In my mirror, the woman stood motionless where she had been, her head slightly lowered. The man behind the ice machine stepped out fully then, watching me leave with a posture that suggested irritation, not surprise. I didn't breathe normally again until I was miles away, the gas station lights shrinking into the distance behind me. Every headlight I saw in the rearview made me tense, waiting for some sign they had followed. None did, but the fear didn't fade. The next morning, unable to shake the unease, I searched for news from that area. What I found made my hands go cold. A missing person report from the same highway corridor. A driver had vanished after stopping at a gas station the previous week. Witnesses said they had seen him talking to a woman near the pumps, a woman matching the exact appearance of the one who asked me for a ride. Police believed she wasn't acting alone. And now, whenever I see someone standing alone near a gas station, especially in the late hours, I can't help but wonder if they're asking for help or offering bait. I was driving through the desert on my way to visit family, the kind of long stretch where the road feels endless and the horizon barely moves. It was late afternoon when I stopped at a small gas station about 40 miles outside the nearest town. The place sat alone off the highway, surrounded by flat open land and the kind of heat that wavers above the asphalt like a slow breathing thing. Only one other car was there, a faded silver sedan parked near the last pump, angled slightly as if the driver hadn't bothered to straighten out before stopping. There was something comforting about the emptiness at first. Quiet, predictable, just a quick stop before the rest of the drive. The moment I stepped out, the air hit me like a wall. The sun was still strong, but the wind was cold in that strange desert way, carrying dust across the concrete. The sedan was maybe 20 yards away, close enough that I could see the shape of someone in the driver's seat, though the glare on the windshield made it impossible to tell if they were awake. I assumed they were napping or waiting for someone inside. People on long road trips do that all the time. But there was a stillness to the car that didn't feel like resting, more like waiting. The kind of waiting that makes you aware of every sound around you, including the soft clank of the pump lifting from its cradle. As I fueled up, I kept glancing toward the store. No one came out, no one went in. The station looked deserted except for me and the sedan. The heat made my vision ripple slightly, and at one point I thought I saw the car shift just an inch or two as if a breeze had nudged it, but when I focused, it was still again. I told myself it was the heat distortion, or my own tiredness, or the odd angle of the ground. I needed a drink anyway, so I locked my car and walked toward the store, trying to ignore the subtle unease threading through my chest. Inside, the place was completely empty. The lights hummed overhead and the air smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaner. I wandered the aisles slower than usual, half expecting someone to appear from the back room, but no one did. The silence inside was different from the silence outside, heavier, like the whole store had been left mid-shift. The register was open, but not in a messy way, just open, like someone had stepped away for a moment and never came back. So when I walked out again, I paused at the door, suddenly wishing I hadn't left my car unlocked earlier. Well, the sedan had moved. Not a lot, just a few feet closer to my car, angled slightly differently. I froze, trying to figure out if it had actually rolled or if I was misremembering the distance. The driver, whoever had been inside, was still there, head leaning slightly toward the window, body slumped. The posture was wrong, though, too still, too heavy, like someone had gone limp rather than relaxed. My mouth went dry. Maybe the parking brake failed, I told myself. Maybe the wind pushed it if the ground sloped even a little. But the air was barely moving, and the sedan was now pointed almost directly at my car. I stood there for a long moment listening. The wind rattled the metal sign by the highway. A distant truck hummed faintly down the road, but nothing came from the sedan, no engine noise, no shifting, no sign of life. I approached slowly, my heart ticking harder with each step. The car looked older up close, with scratches along the door handle and dust collecting around the tires. The window glass was streaked from the inside, like someone had dragged their fingers along it. That detail tightened every muscle in my body. I circled around toward the front, keeping a good 5 feet of distance. The sun hit the windshield just right, and for the first time I saw the driver clearly. A man sat slumped in the seat, eyes open but unfocused, head tilted unnaturally to one side. His skin looked grayish in the light and his mouth hung slightly open. I felt my hands go numb. There was no question in my mind, the man was dead. And the car had moved closer to me while he was in that state, while no one else was around. I backed away, slowly at first, then faster when my breathing turned uneven. I fumbled with my phone, meaning to call someone, but my hands were shaking too much to hit the right buttons. I decided to get to my car and lock myself inside before doing anything else. As I turned, something caught my eye, a figure standing far behind the station, near the edge of the desert brush. Just a silhouette at first, then a clearer shape as my eyes adjusted. Someone was watching. Standing completely still, facing the parking lot. My legs moved faster than my thoughts. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine with a desperate twist of the key. In the rearview mirror, I saw the sedan again. It had rolled another foot, just 1 foot. The timing wasn't possible. It hadn't been long enough. And the slope of the concrete couldn't have caused such perfect, direct movement. The dead man in the seat stared straight ahead, eyes reflecting the harsh light. When I sped out of the station, dust rising behind me, I checked the mirror only once more. The figure by the brush was gone, not walked away, gone, like they'd never been there. The sedan sat motionless again, as if it had never moved at all. The next morning, still shaken, I called the local sheriff's office to report the body. The deputy on the phone paused when I gave the location. He asked me quietly if the car I saw had been a silver sedan with faded paint on the left side. My stomach tightened as I confirmed it. He told me almost reluctantly that the car had been found abandoned there 2 days earlier with a deceased driver inside, and that they had towed it to their impound lot yesterday. Meaning the car I saw, the car that rolled toward me. So I shouldn't have been there. There are moments in life when the world tilts around you, when the familiar becomes wrong in a way you can't justify with logic. Sometimes those moments pass. Sometimes they sit in the back of your mind forever, reminding you that not everything you see on lonely drives is meant to be understood. And now, every time I stop at a gas station alone, I find myself watching for parked cars, especially the ones that look like they shouldn't be able to move. Some nights leave a longer echo than others, and the stories we've shared tonight sit in that quiet space where ordinary moments slip into something darker. Gas stations are places we pass through without thinking, but in the stillness after midnight, Even familiar lights and well-worn routines can reveal a different side of the world. These encounters remind us that danger rarely announces itself loudly. It waits in small hesitations, in shadows near the pumps, in faces we mistake for harmless until it's too late. Fear doesn't always come with chaos. Sometimes it comes with silence. And if you felt a little closer to the people in these stories, it's because all of us have stood in those same places under buzzing lights, clutching keys a little tighter, sensing someone too near or too still. You know that feeling even if you don't talk about it, that soft warning your mind whispers before you understand why. The world grows quieter at night, but your instincts grow sharper. And stories like these remind us that those instincts often know more than we want to admit. If you'd like to stay for more nights like this, you're welcome to. You can subscribe or return whenever the dark feels heavy and you want a voice to keep you company. New stories unfold here, often told softly, without rush. The way people speak when they finally decide to share something they've carried for too long. For now, let the lights dim, let the stillness settle, and let the night feel ordinary again. And the next time you step out at a lonely gas station with only the hum of the pumps and the cold air on your skin, remember the stories you heard here, not to frighten you, but to remind you that caution is often the quietest form of survival. Sleep well if the night allows it.